Hey everybody, it's Drags, and it's Wednesday, April 10th, time for episode 293 of Patriots Beat on the CLNS Media Network. Find us at clnsmedia.com, and of course, as always, follow us on Twitter at PatriotsCLNS. We're gearing up fast for the 2019 NFL Draft at the end of this month, April 25th through the 27th in Nashville, to be exact. And no team needs to take full advantage of this annual restocking plan more than the New England Patriots. Yes, the Super Bowl 53 defending champs, they need to reload here. They've lost Rob Gronkowski to retirement, Chris Hogan, Cordero Patterson, Trent Brown, and Trey Flowers to free agency, though Chris Hogan still remains unsigned. I should throw that caveat in there. How will they use their 12 picks in the draft to restock and reload? Well, no one better, in my estimation, to discuss it all than our own NFL expert, Evan Lazar. Follow him on Twitter at EZLazar. That's EZLazar. And online, of course, at CLNSmedia.com with our Patriots coverage. What up, E?
How's it going?
I'm doing well. You should be honored that I'm asking you what up, E, because my daughter is named Emma, and whenever I see her when she gets home from school or I pick her up, I go, what up, E? So you're in very high company there.
Is that an Entourage reference?
It is, actually.
Okay,
I am a big Entourage fan, but that was well before her time, but I explained Entourage to Emma. So, yes, the whole what up E is an Entourage reference that I've carried over to modern day. I run into you all the time, by the way, at Celtics games. For those of you who don't know, Evan can be spotted in one of the, 58,000 Kyrie Irving number 11 jerseys at the Garden.
Sometimes it's the Tatum jersey. It depends on the day.
Is that right? Oh, I haven't seen you in a Tatum jersey.
Yeah, it rotates when, they lose the game before in the Kyrie jersey. Sometimes I switch it up to the Tatum jersey. But yeah, I've actually had season tickets to the Celtics since I was in the third grade. So going on 20 years now of having season tickets to the season. I like to keep my fandom in one spot, so that's where the Celtics come in now that I'm supposed to be impartial with the Patriots. So.
Yeah, so you think you've seen enough of Daniel Tice jacking up threes at the end of games?
Yeah, I'm good with that. Let's just, I think that one of the best parts about the playoffs, on top of it just being awesome for entertainment purposes, is that they tend to whittle down the rotation to like 7 or 8 guys who are your like ride or die guys. And that always, is when you really get to know who the team really is, when you have a team like the Celtics that are going to make the playoffs and have a high ceiling and all that kind of stuff. So let's get all of those minutes out of there, maybe matchup based only with Daniel Tice, and no more Daniel Tice in the last 5 minutes of games. That'll be nice.
Before we move on to football, what are your realistic expectations going into the playoffs?
For my Celtics, I think that the first round win against Indiana I think that's like something that should be expected out of them, right? They have home court advantage.
Yes.
They have definitely have the talent to be a team that gets out of the first round of the playoffs, especially in the Eastern Conference against a team that doesn't have their best player. So, winning against Indiana, I think, is a given. Then the second round, I think it starts to get interesting. But if they push it's probably going to be Milwaukee in the second round, right? As long as everything goes, or is it Toronto? Yep. I don't remember, but
no, Milwaukee. If they get out of the first round.
Yeah, then they should at least give Milwaukee a series, right? I mean, that should be a 6 or 7 game series.
Well, look, this is not the Celtics Beat podcast with Adam Kaufman, but I will tell you, you better have all of your fingers and toes crossed that Jason Tatum and Marcus Smart, their contusions heal up for the playoffs. But I want to move on to football now, and I want to give you some historical perspective. The Patriots, reading off their 2019 NFL Draft data sheet, they hold 12 picks in the 19 NFL Draft in Nashville, which is tied with the Giants for the most overall picks this year. Patriots' 12 picks are tied for the second highest draft day compilation for the team. Since the draft was shortened back in 1993, the Patriots drafted 12 players in 2009, and believe it or not, they drafted 13, Evan, in 1996. Do you remember that?
I do not. Is that Willie McGinnis's year?
No, I think 94 was Willie McGinnis' year. 2 years, after that. Six of the Patriots' 12 selections are scheduled for the first 3 rounds. We've been over this before. I know you've talked about this, when you've been on before. So I want to get your impression. How do they handle the first day of the draft? How many trades can we expect? And, how are they going to make use of the 6 picks over the first 2 days?
Well, we were just talking about it right before we started recording, and I think the biggest thing is I actually, kind of just looked at the roster right now for the guys that they have under contract, and they got 67 guys under contract. Obviously, not all of those guys are going to make the 53-man roster, but they have 40 guys that are holdovers from the 53-man roster that were active 53-man roster players for Super Bowl 53. Not all those guys were active on game day, but they were all on the active roster. So when you really start to do the numbers of it, the short version here, they don't have a ton of roster spots open, right? I mean, I think it's safe to say if you want to just have a nice round number, they have about 10 roster spots to open for kind of a battle between some of the backups and some of the fringe roster players last year, some of the guys that they've signed to like prove it tryout type contracts in free agency.
Right.
And then their rookie draft class and the undrafted rookies, which we know they're always going to try to find at least one hidden gem in the UDFA sign that they're going to be able to, come on the team 15 consecutive years of an undrafted rookie making the week 1 roster. Obviously last year it was JC Jackson. So I think the biggest thing is when you look at this 12 picks plus a undrafted rookie class as well, there's just not enough spots on the team for all those guys. So what does that mean? I think a trade into 2020 is a very good possibility. I know Patriots fans hate to hear that, but I think the biggest thing is I kind of look at it 2 ways. I don't know if sticking at 32, unless there's just a guy that falls into their lap, like maybe a Jerry Tillery from Notre Dame or a Clelin Ferrell, who's just so supremely talented that they just can't pass on him in that spot. I think that a trade up or a trade down has to happen here because they got to consolidate some of these picks. They're not going to bring in, I just can't imagine them picking chalk with 12 guys and bringing all 12 of them into training camp.
They are not the Cincinnati Bengals. They will never do that. Never have, never will.
Yeah.
You tweeted this out here on Monday. The biggest question about this Patriots draft is how aggressive they'll be. Not enough roster spots, as you just mentioned, Evan, for 12 picks and the UDFAs. Consolidate the picks to land top 50 players. And I find this intriguing.
Yeah.
So you do some of the math that, I think it was the Dallas Cowboys who came up with the draft formula back in the, early 90s?
It's known as the Jimmy Johnson chart, trade value chart.
That's right.
He's kind of the one that's coined it.
Correct. The Jimmy Johnson, draft value chart. Patriots hold the number 32 and the number 73. You mix those together and you get the number 21, which is high enough to get yourself Noah Fant from Iowa, one of the 2 outstanding Iowa tight ends, and that obviously would be with an eye towards replacing Rob Gronkowski.
Right, and the interesting thing is that today Albert Breer reported that Seattle is shopping that 21st overall pick. So that kind of adds some fuel to this fire as well. Even if it's not a guy like Font, that just puts you in a better position to land maybe one of the premier pass rushers in the draft or either one of those Iowa tight ends as well. And really, it's not unheard of for the Patriots to do it. They actually did a version of this exact trade that I proposed on Twitter last night in 2002 when they traded up to draft Daniel Graham. So they actually traded their first round pick, 32nd overall, obviously, because coming right off of the Super Bowl 36 victory. And they traded a later 3rd round pick and they added the 7th round pick because of the difference in the 3rd round picks. And they got the 21st overall pick to move up to snatch Dan Graham, who happens obviously to be a tight end as well. I looked at it and I just thought to myself, what they really need is not necessarily a 12-person draft class where all these guys are going to come in and vie for, back end of the roster spots, wide receiver 4s and 5s or, guys that in the back end of the defensive line. They need premier talent. they need some blue chip players, especially on offense, the firepower without Rob Gronkowski there. And, really all you have is in the passing game is Julian Edelman and the running backs at this point. So you need some firepower there on offense. And then obviously you need to look on the defensive line to replacing Malcolm Brown, to replacing Trey Flowers, of course. So what you need is you need like 2 or 3 what I call blue chip guys that on Monday and Tuesday when opposing teams are game planning for your offense or your defense, they're circling on the depth chart and they're saying, we got to stop this guy, or we got to find a way to scheme and game plan to get this guy slowed down. That's what they need. Right now they don't have any of those guys, on offense besides Julian Edelman and of course the quarterback. So it really is a kind of a limited passing attack. So the way I proposed it was, you trade up in the first round to get Noah Fant, or you trade up in the second round from 56, their first second round pick, and you put yourself in the AJ Brown, Deebo Samuel, maybe N'Keal Harry, that conversation, JJ Arcega-Whiteside. Those kind of guys are what we call blue chip players, or blue chip prospects that you hope become blue chip players.
Speaking with Evan Lazar of CLNSmedia.com, my colleague covering the Patriots, doing a sensational job breaking down not only film but a mock draft for the 2019 NFL draft at the end of this month in Nashville, Tennessee. You can follow him on Twitter at EZLazar. That's EZLAZAR. That's simple. You better do it if you haven't already. You won't get better information than Evan brings you. You mentioned guys that you have to start game planning for on Monday. I think you would agree that Dexter Lawrence could be one of those. And in your 2.0 mock draft, if the Patriots stay at 32, and if Jerry Tillery and Clelin Ferrell, 2 really pure pass rushers, are gone, then you make an interesting case for Dexter Lawrence out of Clemson, a 340-pound defensive tackle that you compare to
Will Forkian. He is Will Forkian. Yeah, Vince Wilfork. Obviously, I don't love doing that because Bill Belichick called Vince Wilfork the best defensive lineman he's ever coached. So that's obviously putting Vince in some pretty high regard when you talk about some of the guys that Belichick has coached over the years. So you don't ever want to, kind of up those types of expectations. But I will say that for Dexter, he's certainly the fastest or lightest 345-pound guy on his feet that I've seen in a long time. He doesn't have the feet or the foot quickness of a true, nose tackle guy. He's really a little bit lighter than that. And he's also just ultra intimidating power in the run game, especially his run defense. So I think that he's very similar to Vince Wilfork in those regards. And he can do some of the similar things where, you clog up the lane in the middle against the run. You really use some of that power, especially when they do single block you, to really push the pocket overall. And you maybe attract a team or a herd of offensive linemen to Dexter Lawrence, 2 or 3 guys at a time, because of that power to block him in the run game, especially. That leaves some of the linebackers, some of the other guys uncovered to come down and make the tackles and actually make the plays, which is what we know Vince did for a decade here in New England, where he wasn't necessarily loading up on tackles and tackles for loss, but everybody else was doing it for him because he was taking up the blockers, or eating up the blockers, as they say. So I think that Lawrence, the Patriots are one of a few teams, there are some teams, but they're one of a few teams, or a handful of teams, I would say, that really still find the value in a prototypical nose tackle, right? Like a guy that is 340 pounds, that isn't going to necessarily beat you with some nuanced rush moves and isn't going to be spinning anytime soon or doing anything, jab steps or anything crazy like that. But he's going to push the pocket and he's going to absolutely stop the run. And they tried that with Danny Shelton last year. Really didn't work out the way that they had hoped. Malcolm Brown, I think, is kind of like a poor man's Dexter Lawrence. They wanted him to be that player, but he never really developed into that player. So I'm hoping, I think the hope for the Patriots would be that other teams are going to kind of prioritize the guys with pass rushing skill sets ahead of Dexter Lawrence, and he ends up falling to the end of the first round because he's certainly a top 20 or so talent in this draft, I would say. But because of the way that the position is viewed now, You're talking about guys that are a lot lighter and a lot quicker. Guys like Aaron Donald is like kind of now the poster child, right, for the defensive tackles and
Right.
for the guys that play on the interior. And that's just not who Dexter Lawrence is. Dexter Lawrence is much more in that Danny Shelton, Vita Vea type mold, which hasn't always worked out for NFL teams in the first round over the last handful of years since the league really started to become a passing league.
Any character issues with Dexter Lawrence? We all know how his college career ended and not being able to play in the final game.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be the question in the interviews, right? You know, that he's going to have to answer, and it's going to probably be one of the first questions that most teams ask him. And, you know, really, it's not necessarily what you find out from Dexter himself. It's actually going above and beyond that and digging into his background from the people that are around him all the time, his old coaching staff, his friends, his family, that kind of stuff. I don't think that it's a huge issue. I think that it's kind of similar, you know, like we didn't knock Julian Edelman's character because he got nicked for some substance that he didn't necessarily know or claimed he didn't necessarily know. So I think that's kind of the same thing here with Dexter Lawrence, where, you know, he claims he didn't have any idea what it was. It was something that I think Clemson ended up taking responsibility for as well, as something that they accidentally, you know, slipped into one of his workout regimen, you know, kind of, you know, stuff that they give those guys to bulk up and stuff like that. So I wouldn't worry too much about it, although, you know, obviously you do have to look into stuff like that.
Sure. Now I'm going to move on to your second round, 56 overall pick if the Patriots keep chalk and hold on to that pick. This is a wide receiver that I don't know, certainly those fans of the draft are going to know this name, but I don't know how many casual Patriot fans, because this player played on the West Coast in the Pac-12.
Yeah.
You know who I'm talking about, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. What can you tell us about him, and why would he potentially be a fit in the Patriot system?
Well, I think that the first two things that stand out with me with Arcega-Whiteside is he has a pretty rare combination of straight line speed and size. He's a big guy, 6'2", 6'3", 225 pounds, and he just ran a sub 4.6. I think it was about a 4.58 or something like that at his pro day in Stanford. So that's moving for a guy that's 225 pounds. That's great about him. The other thing that's great about him is that he is an absolute red zone monster. He's had 18 red zone touchdowns in the last 2 years at Stanford, and they lost a guy by the name of Rob Gronkowski, who was pretty much their, you know, kind of over the years, certainly not last year, but over the years of his career was kind of their red zone, you know, kryptonite to any defense in the red zone. So that adds that element back into it for the Patriots with Arcega-Whiteside. I think the one thing that's underrated, he kind of gets labeled by a lot of people as that red zone monster, as a box out jump ball type specialist, is that his footwork and route releases at the line of scrimmage are actually quite good and really underrated aspect of his game. He has a whole lot of fakes and different jab steps and shoulder fakes that he throws at defensive backs that are trying to press cover him, because he is usually out on the perimeter where he's going to see a lot of press coverage. He is a prototypical X receiver. For Patriots fans, to make an easier kind of translation, that's the role that Josh Gordon played when he was healthy, or he was on the field, I should say, before he, you know, stepped away from football. That X receiver role. I think the biggest thing with the Patriots receivers that makes it so difficult to mock these guys to the Patriots is that it's not just that you have to be able to play, you also have to be able to get on the same page as Tom Brady. And I think that over the years, what I've realized just kind of studying their draft habits and seeing what's worked and hasn't is that you really need a guy that kind of has a savvy to him, has that football IQ, but also has some college production to lean on. So you're not just kind of projecting a guy, you actually can see what he did in college. And that's what I like about Arcega-Whiteside. Over the years, they've drafted guys like Aaron Dobson and Chad Jackson and so on and so forth that have been high-priced prospects, guys that they certainly haven't necessarily reached on, but that you've been projecting a ton with their production because they weren't like overly productive in college where they had these huge individual seasons. So I'm looking for them to do something like that. A guy that has a little bit of clout to him, a little bit of proven ability, because it's tough to get on the same page as Tom Brady. We know that.
That is for sure. And I'm going to stick with the tight end with another second round pick, the 64th overall. I think everybody knows about the two Iowa tight ends and Irv Smith out of Alabama.
Correct.
You suggest Jay Sternberger out of Texas A&M, and what's
I love this kid.
and what's interesting to me about this mock, Evan, is that he does some things that Irv Smith maybe doesn't, or not as that Irv Smith maybe not able to do as well as Sternberger does.
Right. So Irv Smith is I really like Irv Smith. I have him graded out higher than I have Jay Sternberger. He's a better all-around prospect. He certainly blocks in line a whole lot better than Sternberger does. And he's a good receiver, but he doesn't have quite the explosiveness and the big play ability as a receiver that Jay Sternberger has. Jay Sternberger was an absolute terror up the seam at Texas A&M. I mean, nobody in college football could hang with this guy on seam routes up the middle of the field. He had, I think it was something like 20 catches or 21 catches of 20 or more yards last year to lead the entire FBS. He's a big play machine. He's great after the catch. Some of the plays that I've tweeted out of him just dragging defenders down the field and stuff like that. He's just a little bit more dynamic and a little bit more explosive as a pass catcher. I think really, if you look at this entire class of tight ends, he has as much receiving upside as any of these guys. Really, even as any of the guys, I would say as the Iowa guys, maybe besides Noah Fant, who has, just that athletic ability is off the charts. But Jay Sternberger is really a guy that I think wins in his routes very similarly to how the Patriots like to use their tight ends up the seams, stretching the field vertically in the slot and in from an inline position where you're not really expecting it to be stretched. A lot of offenses mostly work from the perimeter and up the field, whereas the Patriots tend to like to stretch the field horizontally and vertically up the seams and up the slot. That's the type of guy that Sternberger can really be for them, and that's why I like him so much for them. I think he can develop as a blocker. It's not that he's not a small guy by any means, 6'4", 225 pounds, 240 pounds, something like that. So he can definitely develop as a blocker. It's just not all there right now, and a little bit coaching. I think that he could get there be an adequate inline blocker. He's certainly not going to be the impact blocker that Rob Gronkowski was. But I think the biggest thing when you look for the Patriots with a tight end in this draft, a lot of people are kind of fixated, to me, on replacing everything that Rob Gronkowski did with one player. A guy that can do it all like Gronk did.
You
block,
can't do that.
Right, and you can't do that. So I think the biggest thing is that you got to take the best player that fits you the best, and then you adapt the offense to what he does. And you're not going to bring in a player to adapt to what Gronk did. You got to adapt around that new guy. So I think that's the biggest thing that I see with a guy that maybe doesn't have the blocking upside as someone like a TJ Hawkinson or an Irv Smith.
So the Patriots depth chart at tight end right now is Jacob Hollister, Steven Anderson, Matt Lacoste, and Ryan Izzo. There's got to be an upgrade there through the draft.
Yeah, I think Lacoste has a pretty good chance of making the roster just based off of the money that they gave him. It's not a ton of money by any means, but he has $500,000 guaranteed, which means a $500,000 dead cap hit if they do cut him. It's certainly manageable if they decide that he shouldn't make the roster. But
one of those prove-it players that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, but it's enough money. Like, for example, Bruce Ellington and Maurice Harris have $0 guaranteed dollars on their contracts and can be cut for nothing. So that they're true tryout players. Whereas I think Lacoste is kind of a guy that they view as maybe like a tight end 3 or a tight end 2 already and has some upside to make the roster. I really like Ryan Izzo too. He's certainly kind of like what Dwayne Allen was for them last year, just solely a blocking type tight end. But I think he could really come in and replace a lot of the stuff that Allen did as a blocker. So I think that those two guys have a pretty good chance to make the roster, but obviously we're talking about guys that are, back end depth type players. They need a guy that's just, their number one or really a factor in the passing game.
Spoke with Inside the Pylons Mark Schofield last week, former college quarterback himself, as a matter of fact, at Wesleyan. And the name Brett Rippon came up. The nephew of Mark Rippon, the former Redskins Super Bowl winning quarterback. And Brett, of course, is a star at Boise State. And you mock him. What do you like about Brett Rippon, and why would that make sense for the Patriots?
Well, I think the main thing that I like about him, that I think a lot of people like about him, is that his processing speed and mental side of the game is really pretty far along, and probably one of the better mental processors in this class. how quickly he gets through his progressions is pretty great. And the ability to get through those progressions so quickly allows what happens a lot of time with Tom Brady is that he gets through those progressions so fast that he's getting the ball out on time and he's setting up his receivers to gain yards after the catch because he's getting the ball in their hands so quickly before the defense is really prepared for them to get the football. So that's a big part of it. The other part of it that I really like from Ripon is his footwork and everything that happens below the waist. He has some of the best throwing mechanics of any quarterback in this class. His arm slot is a little bit low, but other than that, he really is fantastic in terms of his footwork and is really a nice, strong, and sturdy base when he throws the football, which helps him really drive the ball down the field because he's not a very big guy. He's only 6'1" and a little bit and around 215 pounds. He is about the same size as Baker Mayfield. Now, I'm not comparing them as prospects, but just from a measurable standpoint for kind of an eye reference, that's kind of the same size that Ripon is. So he's certainly not small to the point where it's detrimental. He wasn't in that small category with like Kyler Murray, for example, who is, the talk of the draft in terms of his size. So I think that's a lot of things that you like about Ripon, his ability to throw under pressure and just throw downfield dimes with pretty great accuracy under pressure is also very intriguing. He just does a lot of things in the game that are very Patriot-esque, and he also did a lot of things that the Patriots like to do in terms of his versatility of being able to snap the ball from under center or shotgun or pistol. He did it all at Boise State. It's very rare nowadays, as I'm sure you know, Travis, from watching college football, that you get a quarterback under center. And that he
absolutely.
actually has to take a snap under center and turn his back to the defense and run a play action pass from under center. It doesn't happen.
No.
Anymore. And Ripon did that a ton at Boise State. And as we know with Brady, that's a huge part of the Patriots offense is being able to do that. So I think that a lot of the things that we've learned over the last couple of years with guys like Russell Wilson and Baker and now Kyler Murray is that size might be a little bit overrated for quarterbacks and maybe something that's kind of like an old school scouting thing that maybe we can move past now that we've seen it work with guys that aren't necessarily the 6'4", 6'5" guys with huge arms. So I hope that they like Ripon. I think that Will Grier and Ryan Finley are also two very big possibilities if they do quarterback as well.
Speaking with Evan Lazar, you can follow him on Twitter at EZLAZAR. Obviously, follow him on CLNSmedia.com. I think his mock draft is as good as any you will find out there online, and that's saying a lot considering how many mock drafts there are at this time of year for the NFL draft. The thing I love about your mock drafts, Evan, is you have video pretty much with every single pick through, I think, the first six rounds you have video of the particular player. There's no way, though, the Patriots are taking making all 12 picks, right? I mean, that's just not going to happen.
No, and it's not going to happen. And I think that, there's three avenues that I'm going to kind of lay out in a column here in the next couple of days that they could go with it. And they're pretty obvious. But the first one is obviously to kind of consolidate and add all their assets together to move up in the draft, to a pick like 21 where Seattle's going to be picking, or even up in the second round to get back into the top 50 to grab somebody there that they like. There's the option of trading into the 2020 draft. They have, I think it's right now 7 or 8 picks. There's a condition on the Jordan Richards pick that they got for a 7th rounder from Atlanta, but we don't need to get into that. But right now they only have their own selections in the first 4 rounds next year. Now they're going to get the comp picks for Trey Flowers and Trent Brown and all those guys as well, like they did this year for the guys that they lost last year. So they're going to have some back end of the 3rd round picks like they do this year, again next year, but they could obviously be looking to push some of these picks into next year as well. And then the third avenue is what I call the Belichick special, which is shopping some of these picks for veterans, right? And doing those pick swaps that he loves to do, where he gets guys like Jason McCourty or Dwayne Allen or whatever the case may be, and he gets somebody like that. So really you're shrinking the size of the actual draft class, but you're adding a player with a pick anyway. So that's really not, for the numbers sake of it, that's really not doing them too much good. Obviously it's a good problem to have, right? Like you want all the talent on the roster that you can possibly possibly get. But I just think from my perspective, it just makes a whole lot more sense to go after 3 or 4 guys at the top of the draft that they absolutely love, that they think can really come in here and make a huge impact, not only immediately, but for the next 4 or 5 years and beyond, hopefully, than it does to kind of just pick guys at random throughout the entire course of the draft just to pick guys. So I think that that's obvious, not the best approach. So I think that the main thing is that in this draft, they have the ammo to be aggressive and to really control this draft, especially in the second and third rounds. I just hope that Bill Belichick goes out and does it, because sometimes he can be a little bit passive in the draft. We know that, right? Or sometimes where, he just kind of does his thing and picks his guys that, he fall to him and whatnot and goes from there. But this year, I think they really have a chance to dictate the terms and go out and really hunt players that they want to target because they have all this ammunition.
I just also think there's a little more urgency going into this draft for the Patriots than in years past. Not because they're, going to struggle next year on the field per se, but I think their depth is a little bit more exposed as a potential weakness this year. Certainly with the losses of some frontline players like Trey Flowers, Gronk, and even Trent Brown. And I know Isaiah Wynn's going to be projected as stepping up and slotting into that position right away. And if he's healthy, they should be fine. But they lost a lot of frontline talent, and I don't think it's an assumption, it shouldn't be an assumption that everybody that they slot in is going to fit in seamlessly. I want to get to some quick reactions here. I'm going to give you some thoughts, and it's kind of be a rapid fire segment here. Evan, first of all, Josh Gordon, what's the deal, and are the Patriots waiting for the NFL to reinstate him?
Yeah, that's an interesting one because he's giving off vibes like he's going to play next year, right? Like he's working out and tweeting at the Patriots and at Tom Brady, and he's very involved, it seems like, on social media. I think that the Patriots and Josh Gordon are working under the assumption that he's going to be on the field at some point next year. I don't know if it's going to be week 1, but I don't think this indefinite suspension that he's facing is as looming as like a year-long ban or anything like that as people might think. And I also think that there are some rumblings that Josh Gordon actually took himself off the field and he didn't actually fail any drug tests or anything like that, but it was more just a mental health type thing that he felt himself going down a bad road. And that kind of adds up to some of the ways that it kind of all went down how it did,
right,
with him announcing it first and getting out in front of it and all that kind of stuff. And there was never really any confirmation of him failing a drug test. So I think that it's not necessarily going to be some big suspension. And I think that the Patriots and Josh Gordon are kind of hoping that he's going to play next year.
And what about Stephen Gostkowski? I find this fascinating. Why hasn't he found a new deal yet?
Yeah, well, I think that the interesting thing for Gostkowski is that the Patriots kind of have him in a little bit of a corner here because the rest of the league has a kicker. Like this isn't really like a job in the NFL where, you need more than one guy on the roster to do it. So the other 31 teams have a kicker, then, you're really kind of backed into a corner if you're Stephen Gostkowski. If you want to kick next year, it's going to have to be with the Patriots, or you're going to have to wait it out and see if somebody gets hurt in season and needs a replacement. I think the Patriots figure this out. I think they get it done. They have plenty of cap space now to get it done. So there's really no reason to, really mess with it. I know that there's a guy from LSU, Cole Tracy, who is a pretty good college kicker that some people might think the Patriots might draft and kind of do what they did with Vinatieri to Gostkowski. But I really think that the best case scenario for both sides is that he's kicking with the Patriots next year.
And Braxton Berrios.
So this one's really interesting because what do the Patriots think of Braxton Berrios, right? Because that really changes a whole lot of things about this draft for them. Especially, I wouldn't say at the top, because I don't think that Berrios is necessarily the guy that they think is going to come in and, replace a guy's production like a Rob Gronkowski or something like that and be like a stud number 1 receiver. But if they really like Berrios and they don't need to double dip at wide receiver as urgently as maybe some mocks or some people are suggesting. So that I think is like the biggest question. I like Berrios a lot. I think his tape is really good. He's not as good of a prospect as Andy Isabella or Hunter Renfrow, but he's kind of in that next category or that next notch below. I think, all along I've been saying with Berrios that his comp is not Julian Edelman, it's Danny Amendola. That's the type of career that I think that Berrios can have, not not ever going to be a Super Bowl MVP, Pro Bowl caliber receiver, I don't think. But he's going to be a guy like Danny Amendola who can be extremely reliable, have his big games here or there, and hopefully step up in some clutch moments and maybe return some punts and do some stuff like that too.
It would be hilarious if Andy Isabella wound up with the Patriots.
Yeah, him and Hunter Renfrow are, they're prototypical Patriots type guys. Although I think Isabella is a little bit different than some, he's not just a little bit. He's a lot different than a Julian Edelman or a Wes Welker or one of those guys, or even a Hunter Renfrow. He is really a deep threat. He's a down the field receiver. He reminds me a whole lot more of like a T.Y. Hilton or a Brandon Cooks than he does a Julian Edelman. So it's not exactly the same a fit as like a Hunter Renfrow would be. But yeah, I mean, it's a nice marriage nonetheless.
This covered a lot of ground, and you can get even more detail if you go to clnsmedia.com and follow Evan Lazar's outstanding coverage, his mock drafts and his breakdown, his analysis, and also his column coming up on exactly how the Patriots should not only think about 2019 at the end of this month in the NFL draft, but trade into 2020. Evan has just been crushing it ever since he joined CLNS Media last summer. It's just been a joy. He's been awesome to work with. And I want to thank everybody for downloading today's podcast. Evan, I want to thank you for joining us, and I'm sure you'll be busy in the next couple of weeks.
Of course, yeah, you're too kind. Yes, very busy. Got Belichick on Wednesday. He's talking for the first time really, about the draft specifically. He talked at the owners meetings, but that's like a little bit of a different forum. So, a full, Belichick press conference on Wednesday. And then, 2 weeks from Thursday, right, is the first round. So, it's crazy, all the preparation really since the end of the Super Bowl. But I gave myself about a week, and then it was right into it, and the combine is few short weeks after the Super Bowl now. So it's kind of all coming along here, and it's going to be great. In a couple of weeks, 2.5 weeks, 2 weeks, we're going to kind of know what the roster is really going to look like for 2019.
Look forward to joining you, Evan and Alex and Sierra Goodwill. All will have complete CLNS Media team coverage down at Gillette Stadium, April 25th through the 27th. Again, follow Evan on Twitter at EZLAZAR and his must-read prep work on our site, clnsmedia.com. For producer Mike Alongi and the founder of the network, Nick Gelso, this is Mike Petralia, and this has been the Patriots Beat podcast, powered by CLNS Media.
Hello, I'm Dan Lothian, host of the Behind the Media podcast on the CLNS Media Network. Along with Jimmy Young, we dive into the biggest media headlines each week with honest, informed, and sometimes irreverent perspectives. It's not all serious. We deliver information and entertainment. As we like to say on Behind the Media, we find the interesting in media so you don't have to go searching for it. Listen to our podcast and get prepped for the next trip to the water cooler. Subscribe to Behind the Media wherever you get your podcast, or find us on www.clnsmedia.com.